On this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast, I'm joined by Chris Lacy to discuss the Lovesexy centerpiece, Anesthesia. Welcome to the show for the very first time, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. Excited to have you on. I mean, I've seen you around on social media and other, like on YouTube shows. Like you said, you've been on the Michael Dean podcast and been on Aloy Lasanta's Prince's Friend show on YouTube. So, we're to the Lovesexy era. I know this is kind of like one of your favorite albums based off of, the stuff that I've seen and stuff that you've written about. But as a first-time guest to the show, I would like to give you the opportunity to kind of tell the listener a little bit about yourself, your Prince origin story, so to speak, and, what got you into Prince and his music.
Yeah, absolutely. My story with Prince starts like any other story when it comes to music. My mom was, raised on Prince, Michael Jackson, you name it, anything throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s of music, she raised me on. And early on, I can remember, listening to Kiss and 1999. I remember I had faint memories of those songs on the radio, but as a kid, for most of my life, I was just hooked on Michael Jackson for the longest. And it wasn't until I was 14 or 15 years old, I was watching the 1989 Batman movie because I had never seen it at that time. And I remember just watching it through until the end credits. And, it's got Danny Elfman score during the end credits and it automatically goes into Scandalous. And I remember I just stopped what I was doing. And I thought to myself, who the heck is this? Like, I've never heard anything like this before. And then as it got towards the end of the credits, I see Scandalous by Prince. And I'm like, that's the same guy that did Kiss in 1999. I'm like, okay, I need to do my homework on this guy. And then shortly after that, I'm introduced to Purple Rain and then the Very Best of Prince compilation that came out in 2001. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm starting to get more familiar with the hits and stuff, but now I want more. So then fast forward, over a couple of years, and my mom surprises me with tickets to go see him for my 21st birthday. And let's see, this would have been the Welcome to America tour. And he happened to come into town in Columbia, South Carolina in March 2011. And again, I still have somewhat cursory knowledge of Prince. It's, strictly, like hits material type stuff. And I'm hearing him go through all these different songs. And I mean, at this point, he's 52, 53 years old. And I'm, 21. And I'm thinking this guy has ridiculous amount of energy. And he rocked the house for 3.5 hours. And sure enough, and I lost my mind when this happened, is he snuck in Scandalous into the set list. So I jumped out of my seat and I started singing along to it. And my mom was like, how do you know that song? And I told her after the show, I was like, this is what really got me into Prince years ago. And I never shared that with you until now. She's like, okay, I think you're officially hooked. So,
yeah.
So
cool.
Ever since then, he's the reason I started buying records on vinyl. He's the reason I picked up a bass guitar. And he's also the reason why I started taking my music journalism seriously. And, I had written pieces for albumism.com for years, and then I'd started venturing out doing my own thing. And like you said, I've appeared on other shows, Michael Dean, Prince's Friend, Purple Kurt podcast as well. So, it's just, I enjoy being part of this community and figuring out, okay, what is it about Prince that fascinates you? And let's talk about what we like or what we don't like. And, and then just have fun with it. So that's my Prince story in a nutshell.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, having fun with it's what it's all about for me. I mean, this podcast intended to help me, give me an avenue to explore Prince's lyrics in a way that I've never done before, but also to have fun, reach out to the community, talk to people that are into his music like I am. because, it's not everybody on the street. You can't walk up to them and have like a deep, meaningful conversation about the lyrics to Anesthesia. So
exactly.
This is there's a small percentage of us that can do that, and you have to find them, because we're not, you're not necessarily your next door neighbors, right? So, so yeah, Anesthesia is the song that we're talking about today. It is a really important song in terms of, like, I called it like the centerpiece in my intro.
Rightfully so.
Literally and figuratively, like the centerpiece, like it's smack dab in the middle of the Lovesexy album. As far as the track listing, it's number 4 out of 9. And of course, anybody who's familiar at all with the Lovesexy tour from 1988 understands its prominence and place in the set list in terms of how it was designed to be like the finale of Act 1, when Prince finally kind of understands, his purpose and how he wants to maybe deliver a more positive message in the second half with, songs that he recorded for Lovesexy album, and maybe some of his earlier songs that had a positive message. The first half of the concert being very, dance and sex and kind of like some of the more quote unquote nastier Prince songs that people still love. I mean, there's nothing, not to say like he's demonizing those songs. He still liked to play Erotic City. I mean, he played it throughout his career, but he's just saying like, this is a side of me and I want to maybe push forward another side of me in the second half of the set. And Anesthesia was the song that kind of punctuated that Act 1, and gave us the opportunity to understand where he was going with Act 2. Do you have any, as far as the Lovesexy tour, obviously you were too young. I didn't see it in real time. So I don't know, we don't have any memories that we can share about the tour, but have you seen any kind of, I know you've heard the tour. We shared some stuff back and forth a few weeks ago, but have you seen video of the tour before, Chris?
Yes, I do have the Dortmund show, and man, that, the whole setup, everything about it just blew me away. And when I was on Prince's friend's YouTube channel a couple years ago, I said that the Lovesexy tour and the album in general, like that was the album that was his whole career had been pointing up to that moment. And this album was the one that he was born to make. I know I'm kind of stealing a slogan from Emancipation, but that's how I feel about Lovesexy. Like everything that he had been through was pointing to that moment. And I love how Act 1, like you said, it was more lustful, so you have like, Erotic City, Head, Sister, Jack You Off, all that stuff. And then it's all, and then you get a couple of the Black album cuts, Super Funky Califragisexy, and then Bob George was one of my favorite songs. And then now you have Anesthesia at the middle of all this. And he's, and then for the second half, you just have the, more, bright, you have the brightness of the Lovesexy album in general. And it's a great, it's musical theater for the mind as you watch it.
Yeah. Bob George was the song that was played typically right before Anesthesia, right? Yeah, because he gets shot on stage, and he kind of turns into this like cathartic moment when he sings the song. Because the song, as we go through the lyrics, you kind of will paint a picture where the song isn't. It's almost like telling a story. Like it's almost like a parable in a way. The song's lyrics are in some ways, I think. And so there's a story to be told even in the lyrics of this particular song, as opposed to just being like, a really positive and spiritual message from the first word, which it isn't necessarily is, which kind of makes the song really interesting and fascinating. Like it's a little bit, in my mind, a little bit like Temptation from Around the World in a Day in some ways.
Yeah.
I think this song does it better. I think it delivers the message a little bit better.
I agree.
But Temptation was kind of like that, where it starts off, he's, talking about, he has a lot of lust, animal lust, and he's, first half of the song, he's singing about how filled with lust he is. And Then the second half of the song is him being basically scolded by God for being the way he is. And here, I think he's coming to the conclusion a bit more on his own, as opposed to having God telling him, like, he doesn't understand the difference between love and sex, or love and lust. Of course, the title of the song, Anesthesia, so it's two words. It's like a personification of the word anesthesia, which, you know, we can, when we think of that word, we think of like pain relief or numbness or something like that, something along those lines. Like you're kind of unconscious when you're under anesthesia. It's usually typically used in the medical field for surgeries and things of that nature. But I think Prince is using obviously a play on words here to a bit describe, maybe the feeling of being numb, an unfeeling in your life. And this becomes clear as we go through the lyrics, I think. So
yeah.
In terms of the song overall, Chris, before we get started with the lyrics, what's your feeling about just like the song in general, how it's placed on the album? Do you have any just kind of opening thoughts about how you feel about this song? Is it one of your favorites from Lovesexy?
Yeah, I would argue that it is the best song on the album. To me, there's a difference between greatest or favorite or best. I know that Anesthesia wasn't chosen as a single on this record, and it's a shame that it wasn't, because to me, had it been chosen as a single, it would have made the whole Lovesexy concept make more sense to a lot of people that were kind of taken aback by the album cover. They're like, okay, what is this supposed to be? His heart and soul is laid bare on this record. And I'm glad you brought up the title in particular, and how it's it's a play on words, for the medical term, anesthesia. Because to me, what I get from this is that when you know the context of what he went through in his life, personally and professionally, leading up to this point, he was numb to, like it just seemed like he was on this constant search for lasting happiness, and he kept putting it in different things and wasn't getting fulfillment from it. So now he's just like, okay, I have no other choice. I'm gonna surrender to you, Jesus, to help, save me from myself, because I've tried all these other things and it's not working. And I think that that's a universal truth that everyone at some point in their life has felt that moment of like, okay, I just feel like I can't do anything right. I think this is going to make me feel better, but it doesn't. It just makes things worse. So I think that's why this song resonates with a lot of people. And I think that's why it is the best song on the record.
Yeah. And when you said that, it made me think of, obviously anesthesia is the medical term, but you could also replace that with really kind of any drug that one might use to numb pain.
Right.
I mean, a lot of hardcore drug users, people who get addicted to drugs, use it, I think, because they have a lot of pain in their life, and this is their way of coping. This is their coping mechanism. And it ends up just taking over their lives instead of just only being a coping mechanism. Then, of course, it can destroy their lives. But I think a lot of them start off with that intent. Like, I need something, like my life is just too hard to bear right now, and I need a way to numb the pain. And sometimes illicit drugs are the easy solution, or even just like overuse of alcohol, for example.
Yeah.
So it has another meaning there too, even though he doesn't explicitly state that.
Right. And I think for him, he chose a healthier alternative, which was his music. And I think that's what separates him from the other greats, is that, I mean, he lived, breathed, and died music. I mean, like it was his life. And I think, when you look at his skill set, look at his, complete body of work, and Lord only knows what else is left in the vault. Hopefully we'll get to see much of that before we're dead and gone. But you can clearly tell that music was his drug of choice.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we're the beneficiaries of that. Us,
exactly.
The fans, the listeners. We benefited from his drug of choice, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So the song starts out, I mean, really kind of reiterating what we've already talked about and kind of alluded to with the discussion about him, or the character Prince is playing in this song, really feeling pretty down, down and out, and searching for something, anything that can numb the pain. So the opening lines of the song are, "Have you ever been so lonely that you felt like you were the only one in this world? Have you ever wanted to play with someone so much you'd take anyone, boy or girl?" And this kind of speaks to me a little bit, or just basically says the same thing we've been talking about. Like, he's saying he's been so lonely. Mm-hmm. You were the only one in the world. I mean, obviously, being surrounded by people, and I'm not necessarily saying like this is Prince, this is how he felt. He might have, I don't know, but even if he's just writing a fictional story about somebody who is lonely and searching for something, searching for anything that can make them feel good, to feel like you're the only one in this world, when we know like this world has got it's a very well populated, from a human standpoint. There's the population of the human race on this planet is growing exponentially all the time. So literally, of course, you're not the only one in this world. And if you live in a city, you're surrounded by people 24/7. You live in an apartment complex, you could, if there was no walls between you, there might be another person 20 feet away, but you've got like these walls in between your apartment and their apartment, and you don't even realize that they're there. But that doesn't mean anything. You could still obviously be very, very lonely if you don't have any connections with other human beings in the way that you're wanting. And so these opening lines kind of speak a little bit more to like almost using sex as a way to connect, even if it's not, you don't actually connect. It's like a physical craving for human interaction, and you're trying to alleviate that through casual sex. Is that kind of what you get from it too, Chris?
I do get that. If there is a more autobiographical approach to this, I think that this is one of the things I enjoy about Prince's work, is that he was an economic songwriter. He could say so much with so little space. That's one of the things I really love about Little Red Corvette, is that, again, he could say so much with so little space. So in this lyric, if it is more of an autobiographical approach, you got to think by 1988, I mean, he has tons of privileges that others don't. I mean, he has wealth, fame, pleasure, with different women that he's been with. He's got power, luxurious homes, reputation for wisdom, you name it. I mean, anything that he's ever wanted, he has, at his disposal, yet he's still wrestling with like, okay, does my life have any meaning? Because you also got to think of the criticism that he was getting at this time, especially from Black critics who felt that he had abandoned his roots, around the Purple Rain era, and then going into Around the World in a Day, and then Parade, and here he is with Sign of the Times, like that's his return, that this is back to Black moment in a way, and yet it's still not enough. You still have grumblings from people. So I think what's packed up into this opening lyric is all the stuff that he's been through in his life, along with feeling misunderstood. Like he feels like he's doing everything he can to be, his authentic self, and it's still not enough. Which I've wrestled with in my life, where I've learned that if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. And I think that this is his, come to Jesus moment of like, okay, I've done all I can do, and it's still not enough. I still feel unsatisfied. I feel empty. I feel lonely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this was, by all accounts, the 86, 87 period, even though he had some critical successes with Sign of the Times. I mean, Sign of the Times was a popular album from a critical standpoint. It won back a lot of fans maybe that had fallen off. But, from a personal standpoint, he's had a couple failed relationships at this point in his life. Mm-hmm. And, the Black Album, I mean, I covered all that with the last set of podcasts, but that's obviously been widely communicated and discussed about the dark place that he was in when he was recording a lot of this music. And then this is the output of that. So the song was recorded in January of 1988. Black Album was supposed to be released in December 87. So it wasn't that long after he had decided to pull the Black Album that this whole album was recorded. And I've said this in other episodes. This was a really, I don't want to say thrown together because that makes it sound like there was very little thought put into it. But this album was recorded, well, probably written mostly too, but we don't know that for a fact, but definitely recorded all in less than 2 months in December, January of 87, 88. So all this pain and darkness that he had been experiencing in the recent past was still pretty fresh in his mind. I got to think, like, this is not stuff, this isn't ancient history for him yet. This is still pretty fresh. The wounds are still pretty fresh, I think.
Yeah, great point. And I agree with you. This wasn't, an album like this, like, you don't throw it together. I mean, there's others that could, and it probably wouldn't sound as great as this, but I think that speaks to his insane work ethic. I mean, and just the constant creativity that was coming out of him at that time. For him to put together a record this complex yet accessible to a lot of people, I mean, that's truly a gift.
In such a short amount of time too. Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of like the introduction to the songs, or introduction to the song's lyrics. He kind of sings them pretty quietly, and the piano's kind of moving slowly at this point. We don't get the big kind of bombastic music that goes along with the song until we hit the chorus. And the chorus is, "Anesthesia, come to me, talk to me, ravish me, liberate my mind. Tell me what you think of me, praise me, craze me, out this space and time." So that's the chorus. And Chris, I wanted to get your thoughts on the chorus. This is where we're introduced to the title of the song and the concept Anesthesia. What are your overarching thoughts about the chorus and what it's trying to convey to the listener?
Yeah, this is his cry for help. I think he's pretty blunt about where he is. He's like, all this, whatever I'm feeling on the inside, I'm just looking for some sort of escape. And when I'm listening to it, it's as if he's got his hands clenched together and his eyes are closed, and as if he's, praying out loud, like he's just saying, I need help in some sort of way, so, just, take me out of this space and time, take me somewhere else. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a cry for help, but do you think that he's crying for help to the wrong people, to the wrong things still at this point? Like when he's saying anesthesia, come to me, ravish me, liberate my mind, I always got like he's asking for help, but not in the right places.
Yeah, I think so. I think that like we talked about before, he's got all these different things at his disposal that he's trying to find lasting happiness in, and yet it's fleeting. It's not, it may temporarily satisfy him, but it's not going to satisfy him forever. So he's just grasping at straws at this point. He's like, okay, whatever I can get my hands on to take my mind off this pain, I'll do it. So I agree with you. He's reaching out to the wrong sources of happiness.
Yeah. Tell me what you think of me, praise me, craze me. So, when I think of that, I think of somebody who's really kind of doesn't have a strong opinion of themselves, or they are needing and wanting praise and approval from others, where like it should be. I mean, yes, in theory, it should all come from within us, right? I mean, that's the cliche. Like all of us shouldn't need the approval and praise of other people to do what we think is best for us, or to continue following whatever path or muse that we have in our lives. But, we're also all human beings, and we all still want that and need that from others. It doesn't necessarily have to be from everybody, but as long as we get some sort of approval or praise from the right people in our lives, like we all seek that out from our parents as we grow up, or at least, whoever are the authority figures, adult figures in our lives as we're kids. And at this point, Prince is, you could almost read into that to be a little bit like how you had expressed earlier about his kind of losing a little bit of his black audience during like albums like Around the World in a Day and maybe Parade, Praise Me, Tell Me What You Think of Me could also be a little bit of a comment about him missing some of that, that praise that he was getting early on in his career from his own, his own community. So I can see a little bit of that coming out of this chorus as well. And lines like liberate my mind, out this space and time, I get a little bit of allusions to drug use again. When people say like they're high on drugs or they're on drugs, they feel out of their mind, or that takes them out of their the existing place in their mind and elevates them to a different plane of existence, even if it's just hallucinatory or drug induced. So I get a little bit of imagery from those lines as far as drug use as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you 100%. That's also what I get from that part from the chorus. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else about the chorus you want to talk about before we move on?
No, I'm saving it for the second verse because that's when things get pretty interesting.
Yeah. So now the song is kind of ramped up more, and it's at its pace and it's at its flow that it's going to be for most of the song until we reach the climax. So the next lines of the song are, between white and black, night and day, black seemed like the only way. So I danced, music late, nothing great, no way to differentiate. I took a chance. This sounds like almost like a poem to me, like he's writing a little bit, or almost like a journal entry in some ways. And I like how he switches up his structure of the verses throughout the song. He sometimes he just speaks them, sometimes he sings them, sometimes there's only 4 lines, sometimes there's more. So with this line, he's doing a lot of like comparison, black and white, night and day, using that imagery to, I think, a little bit express what he's going to talk about further on in the song, with light kind of representing God and black necessarily in some ways in this context talking about the devil, or just a frame of mind too, like a light frame of mind versus a dark frame of mind. People say you're in a dark place, that's a negative thing. So I get a little bit of that there. So what do you like about this verse, Chris?
Yeah, you touched on it quite a bit. Is that just how poetic it is? And again, it speaks to his pen game. I mean, for him to be able to create vivid images in your mind as you're listening to it is the mark of a great storyteller. And he's wrestling with like you said, light and dark. And then for him, so I danced. That speaks to me as a dancer. I've found dance to be therapeutic. If I'm in a dark frame of mind, all I have to do is just, I could throw on a song, start dancing, and then now I feel refreshed in a way whenever I'm done, and I can look at things with a clearer sense of perspective.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's a very positive way to, kind of get out some of the negative energies that you have. People exercise, dancing, just, performing, any kind of performance, drawing, whatever it takes. It's like using art to kind of shake out some of the cobwebs, so to speak. And like Black Knight seemed like the only way. So that line, I get a little bit like he's already chosen a path. He's chosen Black Knight because he felt like, this dark path of his was the only way. And I saw this on the org, so I'm not going to take credit for it. I don't remember who said it, but somebody wondered like if this was an allusion to the Black Album. Yeah. And so it makes sense to me if it was, considering, again, this is written less than a month after he pulled the Black Album, and he was already, apologizing for it in the video for Alphabet Street. Street, yeah. Yeah, a little bit like Black Knight seemed like the only way, or like the stuff that I was saying, like maybe code for the stuff that I was saying in the Black Album seemed like the only way to, express myself at that time. So I danced. So dancing, again, a lot of those songs are funk dance jams. I mean, super funky Califragilisexy, La Grind, Cindy C. I mean, for the most part, that album's filled with just like danceable tracks from beginning to end, with the exception of When Two Are in Love. And Bob George isn't much of a dance song either.
Yeah.
From that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, it could be considered both ways, I think.
Yeah, and towards the later end there, where it says music late, nothing great, no way to differentiate, I took a chance. To me, it also speaks to that night, December 1st, 1987, when he goes to Rupert's. That's a Minneapolis dance club, or Minneapolis dance club, and that's where he met Ingrid Chavez for the first time. And he's also, there with the test pressing of the Black Album. He's trying to get a feel for how the crowd will respond to this music. And then it, for those that I'm sure a lot of folks already know the story, but Susan Rogers had shown up to Paisley Park later that night after Prince had called her, and she said that his eyes looked dilated as if he was on some kind of drug or something. And so I wonder if that, that all that stuff that happened that night, is that also packed into this part of the song? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the lines in this verse are fascinating because they are kind of oblique without any kind of context. Mm-hmm. So like you and I, we know, and a lot of listeners know these stories.
Right.
So we can apply some of the stuff that might have been the influence for these lyrics. But without that context, these lines they're really kind of hard to really kind of understand. They're hard to parse through, hard to figure out what he's trying to say. Like, took a chance on what? You don't know that. So without all of that, all of this context that we have as avid readers of Prince books and listeners of Prince podcasts and interviews, we know stuff that not people, especially in 1988, didn't know, who were listening to this for the first time. So I think without all that, this verse can seem like a little difficult to understand, a little difficult to kind of understand where he's going with lines like music late, nothing great. Even without the context, it kind of sounds like, dancing, going out late to music. It wasn't inspired by it, maybe. Nothing great being played on the, by the DJ at the time. No way to differentiate, meaning like they all kind of sounded the same. There wasn't anything that he considered unique or groundbreaking, so he took a chance, and maybe that's his way of explaining the writing of the Black Album. Like, I took a chance. I did this thing. Bob George wasn't something that, any of my peers had been doing. Nobody was making a song like Bob George, unless you were even rappers at that time. There was a few and far between that were making quote unquote gangster rap in 1986. So he took a chance. And ultimately he decided that he didn't want to put it out there, but I wonder if that's what he's talking about.
Yeah. And to your point, I think even without the context, it is difficult to discern what he's saying. So I think if you're looking at it as someone who is struggling to find their identity, trying to make sense of life, what you could take from that is, okay, so I danced. I'm turning to dance and music, something that I am familiar with, and yet I'm still unfulfilled, and now I'm having to, reach for something more. I have to take a chance on something else because it's not fulfilling me.
Yeah, that's basically what you have to kind of take away from it if you don't have the stories and the information we have. But because we do, we can look at it from two different angles, which is always fun.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the benefit of doing this and going through these after 30 plus years of stories coming out and people talking and interviews. Yeah. We have a little more information than we would have 34 years ago. All right, so the next verse, so he goes right into the next verse, no chorus in between. And the lines are, Gregory looks just like a ghost, and then a beautiful girl the most, wets her lips to say, we could live for a little while, if you could just learn to smile. You and I could fly away, fly away. All right. So, Chris, what do you see here that you wanted to point out? I mean, there's some interesting lines here, and I've struggled a little bit with this verse myself. So I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, if we're looking at the lyrics themselves, again, it could be a bit of a head scratcher. You're like, okay, who's Gregory? Why does he look like a ghost? Who's this beautiful girl that he speaks of? And and what she says after that, I mean, it is pretty heartwarming, to be like, okay, well, if I could learn to smile, if I could learn to find, uh, a more positive outlook on life, then you know I won't feel so down in the dumps like I am right now. But so if I were to, again, add the context that we do know, Gregory Brooks, who was part of the Sign of the Times band, he's been around. Well, I think even before that, Parade, and I think a little bit of Purple Rain. He was around for that too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think this is the aftermath of him experimenting with ecstasy. I know some folk. I know that that's a divisive topic for some folks. Some folks think that he did. Others folks think that he didn't. But I think this is a reference to what he had mentioned in the album opener. I know he says, the reason why my voice is so clear is because there's no smack on my brain. So I think this is him, saying, hey, this is the aftermath of me experimenting with a drug. So Gregory looks like a ghost, and then now here comes this beautiful woman out of nowhere. She's that ray of sunshine that I needed in that moment because I was starting to drift too far. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. Because he never really referred to Greg Brooks as Gregory, so it's almost like he's trying to code it a little bit. But no, it makes sense. I mean, Wally and Greg were, I think he considered them friends, people that he could rely on as confidants, so to speak, around this time. He kept him on for years in the 80s, as part of his entourage or his touring band. So that makes sense. And Gregory looks just like a ghost. Absolutely. Could mean, when you're under the influence, people don't look like how they normally look like, I mean, you have images in your head that aren't really there. You see things that aren't really there. So I like that interpretation, even though, like you said, it is a bit of a divisive kind of conversation to have, but I think it's important, especially since this whole album is a reaction to stuff that happened, a couple months ago at the time, or less than a couple months ago in some cases, weeks ago. So a lot of the stuff, he's probably kind of maybe a little bit freaked out about what he did and what he experienced, and really feels like he needs to make amends in some way, or at least denounce it in some way. And then the beautiful girl the most wets her lips and say, I mean, sure, could he be talking about Ingrid here? Maybe. If you want to put an actual person, but it also could just mean that, the beautiful girl could be Anesthesia still, the character that he uses to represent this pain-numbing effects that she has on him. We could live for a little while if you just learn to smile. You and I could fly away. Maybe it's a little bit more of like Anesthesia just trying to lure the character into darkness further through beauty, through promises of great things. I don't know. It could be just another tactic of Spooky Electric to lure Prince away from the light into darkness through her luring ability, her siren song, so to speak.
Yeah. That's a great observation there. It reminds me of what Kendrick Lamar went through on the To Pimp a Butterfly album. He would reference Lucifer as Lucy. Lucy would take on the form of the things that he wanted the most, and that was a tactic to keep him in the darkness and to keep him in bondage, instead of seeking Christ or seeking a higher level of understanding on how to navigate, the highs and lows of life. So that's extremely possible that Anesthesia is, saying, hey, we could fly away, just stick with me, kind of thing. And Yeah, that's a great observation.
Thanks. Another thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't, this is just more of a kind of a interesting aside. Not that I think it has a lot of meaning to the song at all, but I did want to bring it up because I thought it was kind of interesting. So Gregory, it could be Greg Brooks, it could just be somebody made up, but nevertheless, what was the pseudonym that Maite used when she checked into the hospital to give birth? Gregory.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Oh Gregory. My gosh, I forgot about that. Wow, man, way to dig deep to that.
That's why the rumor was that Prince and Maite's child was named Boy Gregory, because that's the pseudonym that she used to check into the hospital, and because the baby didn't have a name yet or wasn't publicized with a name, Amir had not been communicated to the public. People just ran with Boy Gregory as being like the official birth certificate name that Prince and Maite gave their son. It might just be, so again, I don't know. I think the connection's loose, but it's there. Maybe Prince influenced her to like, it would be a great pseudonym, Gregory. Maybe it was Maite's idea. I don't know. I'd have to ask her, and I don't think I probably will. But it's a little rough period. It's something. It's a little personal from a stranger coming. Like, why did you choose Gregory when you checked in to give birth to your son? So I won't be doing that, but it is something that I want to throw out there.
No. I'm glad you mentioned that because again, to some that may be a loose interpretation of that, but to me, it's a princely Easter egg to be like, oh, okay, well, this could possibly connect to this.
Okay, so after that, then we do get the chorus again, and the chorus is the same. Anesthesia, come to me, talk to me, ravish me, liberate my mind, tell me what you think of me, praise me, craze me out the space and time. And then after the chorus, then we get, this is like where the song starts to change a little bit. He's got a bit of an interlude here. He says, maybe I could learn to love. I mean the right way. I mean the only way. Perhaps could show me, baby. And then we get the piece of the chorus again. But before we move on to the next grouping of lines and like the interlude or breakdown, or however you want to call it. So here, Prince screams kind of like maybe. It almost sounds like baby if you're not paying attention. Mm-hmm. And either way, it kind of works, but maybe it works a little bit better because he's saying I could learn to love. So maybe I could learn to love, which tells me maybe he's had difficulties in his past loving in the right way, the only way, as he says, as opposed to loving for the moment or loving selfishly, loving the physical aspects, and not love in the way that he feels like is more equal or something that God would approve of. I guess I don't really know like what the right way is to love, but I think it's one of those things like if you are experiencing that, it's right or not. Like it's hard to explain, but when you're in it, if it's the right kind of love or not. I feel.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that? What do you think about these lines in general?
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. I think you're on the right train of thought there. And as a man of Christian faith myself, I see a lot of King Solomon in Prince's character in this song. King Solomon was, someone that was, wealthy, famous, had all kinds of privileges that others didn't. And his father was David, who, slayed Goliath and all that stuff. But his father, David, was a man after God's own heart. And that's why, David became the great king that he was. Now, he still wrestled with, temptations and things like that. But King Solomon was reminded that, in order for me to understand what true love is, I need to be seeking God's own heart. And I think that's what Prince is saying here, is that for me to understand what true love is, not selfish love, as you mentioned, but what is true love, I need to seek after, where does love come from? And Prince comes to the realization that, it's something beyond himself that he's going to have to figure out the true definition of love from.
Yeah. Good point. I think that works for me too. And I think it matches the kind of the intent of the song and where it's ultimately going. So he also says later on the breakdown, there's a little bit of an instrumental piece, and then he says a couple of lines of the chorus again, but then he kind of repeats the maybe, baby, maybe I could learn to love. life. It was just closer to something, closer to your higher self. I don't know. Closer to heaven? Maybe. Closer to God? Yeah, closer to God. And this is kind of when we start to. He starts the character that Prince is playing in this song, Prince or whomever it is. You get the sense that he's now starting to figure out what it is that he needs to do here, how he needs to find what's missing in his life, closer to God. So that closer to heaven, closer to God, he's starting to get it, I guess, yes, for lack of a better word. Like he's starting to understand, I think.
Yeah, he is. There's a much different, much deeper kind of desire that's awakening in him in this moment, during this part of the song. And again, I think that speaks to, on a universal level, everybody's had that realization of like, okay, there's got to be something more to life than what I'm doing. Like, there's got to be something better. I think we're all internally wired that way, to have to look within ourselves and be like, okay, am I, is there something off with me? And if so, what do I need to do to fulfill that hole in my heart, or that emptiness in my soul? And then, like you said, it's all starting to come together where it's starting to make sense to him.
Yep, I agree. Okay, so then moving on, we get now, as he talked about, he's starting to figure things out. He's starting to figure out what he needs out of life, the direction he needs to go. And these are kind of expressed more clearly here in this next verse. Save me, Jesus, I've been a fool. How could I forget you are the rule? You are my God, I am your child. From now on, I shall be wild. I shall be quick, I shall be strong. I'll tell your story no matter how long, no matter. Okay, so now, like I said, he's basically, confessing in a way, he's apologizing in a way, he's asking for forgiveness, asking for saving. He literally says, "Save me, Jesus, I've been a fool." And this is, kind of like somebody hits rock bottom, and they finally figured out in their mind what they need to do to change their life or to make things better, whatever that is. And in this song, from the perspective that Prince is singing, it's through God, it's through Jesus Christ, and this is very clearly, like, he's not using Prince made up terms. He's not talking about the elevator or spooky electric or anything like that. He's saying Jesus and God, right? Very clear as day in this. And that's, I think, is important, because this is one of those albums where he pretty much lays his faith bare, and no pun intended, I guess, but when you think about the album cover. But I think this is him really explicitly stating stuff that he had been kind of not necessarily tiptoeing around, but being kind of careful about which songs he was overtly religious in and which songs that he wasn't. This is the centerpiece. This isn't a B-side like God. This isn't an album closer like Temptation. This is like smack dab in the middle of the record. This is the theme of the album. Lovesexy. Save me, Jesus, I've been a fool. This is, in my mind, I'm listening to this and like all the stuff that he's been singing about throughout this song. And you can even think about stuff that happened in his life before the verses of this song. This is his, I want saving, I want to be a better person, and I'm going to do that through God.
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. I don't know if I can I don't know if I can add anything more to that without sounding redundant.
Okay, well then I won't ask you to then.
But no, here's one thing I will say is that again, as a man of Christian faith, I've had that. I vividly remember that moment happening to me when I was 19. Of there was so much brokenness in my life. Growing up without my dad around. Dealing with the pressures of being half black and half white. I didn't quite know where I fit in. And then I started developing vitiligo when I was 12. And, when you're in middle school, kids have no filter on top of, your body's changing, and you go from talking like this to talking like this, and you're just going through so many changes. And after all of that, I finally, my soul was exhausted. I was just saying, okay, like I can't seem to figure this out. Like I need to find peace in some sort of way. Otherwise I'm going to drive myself crazy. And when I accepted Christ into my heart when I was 19, I just remembered the immediate sense of relief I got from it, because I knew that I truly got it. It wasn't like, okay, like I'm just dumping it into something else, and now I'm going to move on to something else. Like I vividly remember that moment and felt the conviction. I felt the joy that came from it, of like, okay, I kept trying to find all these different answers and I was ultimately unfulfilled. And now that I finally found it, this is where I need to root my identity. This is where I need to root my foundation. So that it seems as if Prince is going through, or whether it's Prince or Prince's character through this song, that's that moment, that aha moment of things clicking in his head of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it really is relevant for the song and relevant for this part of the song specifically. I get a lot of imagery of the character Prince is playing, or Prince himself in this moment, kind of like feeling desperate, broken, on his knees, like he's praying and saying these words as he's praying. Like I get imagery of like him, his hands folded, mm-hmm. and looking up to God and basically saying what he's saying here in this verse and this breakdown. Regretful for choices made, because he says then later, we're just a play in your master plan. Now, my Lord, I understand. And right after that, we get like this musical swell, and then we get basically the huge catharsis. I mentioned cathartic moment of this song, but it really comes now. I mean, we don't get that until this moment in the song. And that's, of course, the love is God, God is love, girls and boys love God above. Very simple, but it's repeated over and over and over, and it's done in a way that it kind of feels like it turns it into a gospel song in a way, especially mm-hmm. with this part. I think that's a lot of how I feel about the song and how I feel about its performance. It's very joyful. Like I said, the music swells. You get more voices. You get Sheila and Bonnie and Kat, and it just feels like a choir in some ways singing this all together, and very harmonious. And it's a feel good moment, even if you're not super religious. Like you could still feel good in this moment, knowing how good it's supposed to make you feel and how good the people who are singing it feel to sing it. You can't help but feel good about it, even if it's not your bag, you're not an overly religious person. It's really hard to not feel good about this song in this moment of the song.
Yeah. Again, well stated. I've played this song for friends of mine who are atheists or even agnostic, or they subscribe to a different ideology when it comes to their faith, and they've all come back and said, wow, like this is some powerful stuff. And again, I think it's because Prince found a fine line of being able to profess his understanding of God or spirituality without coming across as too preachy or Bible thumping or like trying to oppress someone else's faith. It's just him making this profession of love is God, God is love, girls and boys love God above. Like whether you're 5 years old, 55 years old, whatever, like no matter how old you are, people can understand that on a fundamental level. So I think that's what gives the song that global appeal, that regardless of where you are in your life, anybody can understand that simple statement. That mantra is just it's heartbursting. Like like you said, when he's saying it himself, and then you add the layers on top of it with Bonnie, Sheila, Kat, it just becomes this massive wall of sound that you can't help but feel overjoyed for him and even for yourself if you're able to connect with it in that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And now that we've gotten this message, love is God, God is love, it gives us a new outlook on the word love. And this is I think this is going back to referring to he wants to love in the right way, the only way, and, through God, because in Prince's mind, especially communicated in this song, but I think even probably before this song, he's considered both to be on equal footing. Like, he doesn't put God above love or love above God. They're kind of on the same level because he experiences God through love. That's what I think this is obviously saying, or maybe not obviously, but what it's saying in my mind is he experiences God through love and love through God, and they're inseparable in many ways in his mind, and especially if it's love in the right way, which is what he strives for in the song and the lyrics of the song, and has clearly been striving for a while, basically ever since. I kind of cite like the Purple Rain tour as being the moment where I think this side of Prince was really struggling to get out, because he had that whole interlude during the Purple Rain tour with the God section, and it wasn't just like really brief either. It was like 5-6 minutes of this theatrics of him talking to God, and it's about this. It's about relying on sex in place of love, not understanding love's place in the universe between human beings, and also how that relates back to how we can relate to God through the love of one another, love for one another. So it took 4 years maybe for him to finally put it out there in a song as clearly and eloquently written as Anesthesia, but never too late, right? Better late than never.
Yeah. And again, everything you said is spot on. And I'm reminded of other stuff that I've read about Prince. He grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist church, and that denomination of the church is very similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses that he would later convert to in 2001. Of course, shaped the Rainbow Children and other records after that. But the basis of that denomination tends to be, we're in the end times. There's a lot of doom and gloom, but one of his takeaways from being growing up in church was finding a lot of joy through music. And I think that he's always wrestled with that ever since he was a child up to this point. And now it's all crystallized for him to be like, okay, I understand, what love is. I understand what sex is. It comes from God. It belongs to God, and it continues to exist because of God. That's why I'm here. That's why all of us are here. In some way we got here because our parents hooked up, that kind of thing. So as Christians, or even if you're not a Christian at all, the topic of sex should not be an uncomfortable conversation. They're one and the same, and they both come from God, and it's good. It's good to talk about those things. So I think that's all encompassed in this song. It's encompassed in the record, and especially the world tour. If for those that are listening and we're fortunate to see it in real time, I'm somewhat envious in a way, because I'm like, man, I wish I could have seen that. But you see him wrestling with those things, and also listen to his first 9 records leading up to Lovesexy. His understanding of lust and sex is like, he's growing, and he's understanding both love and sex and what they should mean. So he's figuring this out in real time and putting it on wax and capturing it there. And then now when we get to Lovesexy, he now understands the value of both love and sex. And I think that it was genius of him to put it together in that way and be like, okay, well, I know I'm being a little provocative here, but it's coming from a pure place. So there's room for both, and if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, he's growing up right in front of us through these albums. I mean, he had a very young man's outlook towards sex on the early stuff. Just didn't have, it was more lust driven. It was more hormone driven. you get the sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is, I mean, that's every man. He's not unique. We all kind of learn as we age how to control some of those animal instinct, so to speak. And he at this time, he's about to turn 30. Hadn't quite turned 30 yet, but he was pushing 30 at this time.
Right.
So he's no longer, of that extreme youthful age that he was when he was recording songs like Soft and Wet and, Sexy Dancer and stuff like that. So he was learning, and he was expressing his learnings in real time as, he was kind of understanding himself. He would create songs about that. And so he's like, I just learned this thing, man. I need to write a song about it. Like, this is amazing. I just figured this out for myself. So guess what? I'm going to write a song about it.
Yep. And I'm so glad that you brought up the maturity aspect of it. Because again, I'm thinking about it as someone who's going to be turning 32 in a few weeks. The things that, or the way that I look at life now is vastly different from how I looked at it when I was 20, 21, 22. Like, it was a constant process of me understanding life and how I fit within it. And then what do I need to do to make sure that I'm maintaining a healthy perspective of the things that matter in life. And with Prince, he was going through the same thing, and his release or his avenue for that was through his music.
Mm-hmm. There's no arrested development when it comes to Prince's music.
Right.
You see it and you hear it, him maturing on each album. So he's not repeating himself, not singing about the same 5 topics that he did when he was 20 all throughout his 30s, 40s, and 50s. So all right. Well, that was really, really well said, Chris. Nice way to kind of close out the episode. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you didn't get a chance to communicate about the song throughout while we're doing the episode?
Yeah, I was going to share like a quick criteria, because and I'm sure you've seen this on Twitter. Whenever I get into a musical discussion about Prince, or we're talking about songs or albums, I like coming up with a criteria to really, encompass the best parts of Prince. And if a song or an album can check all those boxes, then that lets me know, okay, this is among the best of the best. So the criteria that I have for, Prince songs or Prince albums, there's a few things here. One is, Prince was known for blurring the musical styles, taking any genre and bending it to his will. He was a cinematic storyteller. He had some Guitar Hero moments, throughout the song, and then he's able to show, limitless vocal range. And then he also has the ability to appeal to the masses. It's not like he only spoke to American audiences. I mean, a lot of Europeans gravitated to this album far better than the Americans did at that time. And then there's just that little touch of the bizarre, like Prince was known to kind of do things kind of left of center to make you catch your attention. And when you go down that checklist, Anesthesia checks all the boxes. So that's why I would say that not only is it the best song on this record, but it is, for me, it's a top 10, top 15 song all time in his entire catalog. How about you?
Yeah, no, I wrestle between this and Alphabet Street just because Alphabet Street's so damn funky.
It is, yes.
Such a great song.
Yeah.
But no, this song has a bigger message, of course, than Alphabet Street. Alphabet Street's more fun than it is deep or insightful. This song is, like I said, it's got a goosebump moment, right? I mean, not every Prince song has a goosebump moment, and the song has that, which elevates it a bit in my mind, even though it's not a big hit or one of the songs that people cite constantly when talking about Prince's best compositions or best songs. But its place on Lovesexy, its place in his career, this is kind of like a line in the sand almost in some ways, where from this moment on, Prince isn't afraid to talk about religion, isn't afraid to talk about, not that I'm saying he was afraid before, because he clearly did.
Right.
I'm definitely not saying Lovesexy was the first time he ever talked about God. No, obviously not. But I think at this point on, he's less concerned about maybe how it's going to come across from anybody. He is open about, the whole tour The whole tour is about kind of like this search for something bigger and better for himself, and learning from mistakes and figuring out, God is the way for him. Like this is his path. He's not again trying to be preachy and saying like, if you don't believe this, you're a bad person or you're wrong. He's just saying, this is how I have figured out how I need to live my life, and how I'm going to approach, potential future relationships through God, or through, through Jesus Christ. And now that's my path. Like this whole, like Graffiti Bridge, the whole album and movie more specifically, it kind of feels like the sequel to Lovesexy in some ways. Mm-hmm. So this is not something he just did for one album and then moved on to the next thing. And that's why Anesthesia is so important to me.
Yeah. And what you just said is spot on as far as the influence of this song and this album in general. It would go on to shape much of his catalog after that. Like you said, the Graffiti Bridge album and movie, the song "And God Created Woman" from Love Symbol album. I mean, like there's countless songs after this that you could see him, exploring more of God in his work. And there's a moment in a documentary, I think it's called Prince: A Musical Portrait. And there's a fan after the show, he's talking about, how the show went and stuff. And he said, for a guy to be on stage and to get people to shout, love is God, God is love back to him, you feel compelled to say it back to him. Even if you don't believe it, you respect the fact that he is, he's convicted in that way to share it with people. Like he's sharing it, not demanding it of you. You know what I mean?
That's a really important point to make, because otherwise it's a fine line, right? It's a very fine line.
Absolutely.
And people who aren't, as religious or don't have the same ideologies can easily and quickly get turned off if they feel like they're being preached to, or if they feel like they're being spoken down to or judged. And that just speaks to the fact that he didn't do that. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more resistance to repeating these lines, or even just like attending the concert. Like if word got out, like this was a concert all about Jesus and God, and if Prince spent 10 minutes talking down to you if you didn't believe, that the word would get out and people might have been turned off and didn't attend. But this was a really successful concert from an attendance standpoint, so I don't believe that was the case at all.
Yeah, there was and what you said it definitely connects with me. Is early on in my faith, I was so hyped up on Jesus that I wanted to share with everybody, but I needed time to kind of mature in my approach, because there were times that I would come across as them like, no, like you need to believe this. I need you to understand it. But then over time, after leaving a bad taste in some people's mouths, I realized like, okay, Chris, like there was a time that you didn't get it. And if someone were talking down to you, would you give them the time of day? Heck no, I wouldn't do that. So it's a matter of simply just, planting the seed. You can't control what condition the soil is in. If it's soft soil, it'll take it. If it's hard, then it won't take it. But that's out of your control. All you can do is just share what you know to be true. And if people get it, great. If they don't, they don't. Don't try to beat them across the head about it. So that I think that's why this record is so special. And I think that's why, even if you're not a believer, you still gravitate to it, because the sheer amount of joy that comes from this song and this record in general, it's contagious. And you're like, man, like whatever he's got, I want some of that. And if that's what God is, then maybe I need to give this a shot. If my way's not working, and I want to experience the joy that he's feeling.
Yeah. Very well said. Very well said.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for the conversation on this episode. It's an important episode, so I appreciate your insight. I want to give you an opportunity to share what you're up to with the listeners, and maybe where people can find you and talk Prince or talk God or talk whatever. So
yeah.
Why don't you throw it out there?
Yeah, as far as the projects I'm working on, there is a 3-part article I'm working on for Lovesexy 35, and it's shaping up to be my most ambitious project yet. But the working title is How Prince Brought Sex Back to the Church. And the whole premise of it is that I want to help make the words God and sex less awkward for people. And I think Prince was able to do that on this record. So I'm going to unpack how Prince did that and how we should look at ourselves and the topics of God and sex going forward. Hopefully it'll be a great conversation for people to have. And then let's see, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. My name is spelled Chrisslacy on Facebook. Twitter is Chris Lacy 90, and then Instagram is Chris Lacy 1990. So it's Chris Lacy 1990 on Instagram.
Okay, great. Thank you again so much. Appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be on another episode again before too long and do this again. I had a great time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that very much. Thank you.
So this has been the Press Rewind Prince Dirks podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. You can find the show at Press Rewind Pod, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, also on YouTube. So check out what I'm doing there as well if you're into the YouTube thing. Discord, I've got a Discord server if you would like, or you like using that platform to talk. We chat about Prince, we share stuff on there. If you have any questions about episodes, you can shoot them to me that way. And pressrewind.net is my website, and I post episodes there, and as well as any kind of writing that I do about music. Not always about Prince, but 90% of it is, especially these days now that I got a show. So thanks to listeners, thanks to Chris, and until next time, goodbye.